Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. The clouds above Abaddon that evening hung low like overripe fruit waiting to fall, casting long shadows across the peeling fences and tired rooftops of old Bodija. Eliza Turner sat by the wooden-framed window of their modest two-bedroom bungalow, her palms folded tightly across her swollen belly, tracing silent circles around the navel. Her face was still, but her thoughts moved like restless spirits in a market square. Outside, the sounds of the neighborhood whispered around her, clattering Okadas racing past, children arguing over marbles, the clink of a distant spoon against aluminum pot. She used to love this neighborhood, the rhythm of it, the familiarity, the way it had once hummed in tune with her joy. But lately every sound seemed like noise, too loud, too fast, too distant. Her eyes drifted toward the iron gate, still rust-stained from the last rainy season. It had been 4 hours since Jason said he was going to pick up something from town. That was his latest phrase, vague, disposable, always uttered without eye contact. She reached for the bottle of olive oil on the table and dabbed a little on her stretch marks, the smell reminding her of the early days of their marriage, back when Jason still touched her with care and the air between them wasn't so thick with unsaid things. The old wall clock above the TV ticked in rhythm with her baby's occasional kicks. A month to her due date, yet her spirit felt more exhausted than her body ever could. Jason's absence had once been an inconvenience. Now it felt like a warning. A storm was coming, and she wasn't sure if she would survive it this time. She met Jason 6 years ago, on a drizzling Wednesday afternoon inside an electronics store at Dugby Market. He had been arguing over the price of a second-hand blender with such dramatic flair that Eliza couldn't help but laugh. Their eyes met over a broken ceiling fan, and that was the spark. He had charm in abundance, his words smooth like buttered acra, his smile crooked but confident. Back then, he was a bricklayer with wild dreams of owning a construction firm. Eliza, soft-spoken and freshly graduated from a teacher training college in Acure, was only in Abaddon to visit her cousin. But Jason turned her visit into a chapter that never ended. He was never rich, but he was thoughtful. He wrote her notes on receipts, carried her umbrella in the rain, surprised her with groundnuts when she was hungry between classes. Their love had grown like creeping vines, steadily wrapping itself around her bones, comforting and warm. She remembered their wedding, a modest affair under a rented canopy in Makola, with jollof rice served in takeaway packs and two families dancing like they'd struck gold. When she moved into his flat, she carried her dreams with her, folded carefully inside hand-sewn wrappers. She wanted to build a home full of laughter and stories, the kind of home her late mother used to tell her about in bedtime tales. And for a while, it looked like they were on their way there. Until small things began to change. The way Jason sometimes came home without greeting her, how his phone always had a password now, how her laughter seemed to echo in an empty room instead of drawing him in. Those weren't just signs. They were the roots of something rotting beneath the floorboards. As her belly grew, so did the distance between them. Jason had gotten a job offer in Kaduna, a promising one, he claimed, handling roofing and plastering for a small estate project. It would be for just 2 months, he assured her. But then 2 turned to 4, and 4 turned into uncertainty. He only came home once, and even then, it was as if he'd left his affection in the suitcase. He spoke less, barely touched her belly, and when she tried to tell him about the baby's kicks, his eyes wandered to the TV screen instead. That night, she had cried into her wrapper with her mouth shut tight, so he wouldn't hear. Pride had replaced apology in his vocabulary. His presence, when it existed, felt like that of a guest overstaying their welcome. And still, Eliza cooked his meals, washed his clothes, and prayed for his return. The worst part wasn't the silence, it was how normal it began to feel. Her sister, Anita, called often from Ilorin, pleading with her to come over before the baby came. But Eliza was stubborn. She still believed in the man she married, in the vow he made beneath the leaking ceiling of that church in Dugby. She thought if she held on a little longer, he'd find his way back to her. Maybe it was foolishness. Maybe it was love in its most tragic costume. Or maybe it was just the kind of hope women are taught to wear like a second skin, tight, painful, but too familiar to shed. By the end of that week, the signs could no longer be ignored. Jason had stopped sleeping in their bedroom altogether. He claimed he was tired, that the guest room's mattress helped his back. But the truth revealed itself in whispers and perfume. Once, while picking up his laundry, Eliza found a lipstick-stained napkin tucked into his shirt pocket. Bright red, the kind no Abaddon woman wore without turning heads. It smelled of musk and citrus, far from her own subtle lavender. That night, she cooked his favorite meal, ofada rice and fried plantain, but he only picked at it, barely speaking, eyes fixed on his phone like it held better company. Eliza watched him from across the table, her heart heavy, yet her face calm. She had mastered the art of swallowing sorrow. When he went to bed, she stood by the kitchen sink long after the plates had been washed, hands trembling as she stared into the dark courtyard. In that moment, the final piece clicked. She knew. Not just suspected, not just feared, knew. Jason wasn't hers anymore. Not fully. Not even halfway. And yet, as she turned off the light and walked to their empty bed, she still whispered his name in her heart, hoping the wind might carry it to wherever he now found comfort. The heat in Kaduna was not the kind that stayed outside your clothes. It clung to your skin like wet fabric, refusing to let go. Eliza arrived just after noon, stepping off the bus with a belly that shifted under her weight and ankles that had begun to feel like stone. The conductor had tried to rush her as they approached the terminal, but one glare from her was enough to silence his impatience. She adjusted her wrapper, rebalanced her small overnight bag, and took a long breath before flagging down a kiki. Jason didn't know she was coming. He hadn't called in days. Her plan wasn't made out of impulse, it was survival. She had spent the past week talking to her reflection in the mirror, convincing herself she deserved to know the truth, not whispered clues or half-eaten lies, but truth in its full, bitter flavor. The kiki rattled through the uneven roads of Barnawa Extension, dodging potholes with sharp twists that made her wince. When she finally arrived at the compound, painted yellow with a tired green gate, her heart had already begun its own protest. She knocked 3 times. No answer. She knocked again, this time louder. A woman opened the gate, barefoot and smiling, her voice bright like someone who knew she belonged. "You must be looking for Jason," she said, the sentence too casual, too relaxed to come from a stranger. Eliza nodded slowly, keeping her words inside her throat, her hands resting just above her navel. The woman didn't introduce herself. She just turned back into the compound, calling over her shoulder, "He's inside." Eliza followed, her steps heavy, and as they reached the doorway, she saw him, Jason, shirtless, sitting on the couch, with a beer in one hand and his phone in the other. He looked up and froze, as if he had seen a ghost. The woman walked past him and picked up a red shawl from the chair. No one said a word. The silence between them had grown legs. Jason recovered with a kind of careless grace that made Eliza's stomach churn. He stood up, slowly, muttering something about not expecting her, his eyes darting toward the woman who now lingered by the fridge, pouring herself a glass of water like she had done it 100 times. Eliza didn't cry. Her lips didn't even tremble. She only nodded and asked, "Is this where you live now?" Her voice was soft but carried weight like a loaded wheelbarrow. Jason stammered, then scoffed, then tried to explain something that didn't matter anymore. He used words like temporary, helping out, and nothing serious. But Eliza wasn't stupid. She saw the way the woman moved, the way her clothes hung in the closet, the way her laughter filled the room without caution. This wasn't a visitor. This was someone who had unpacked. She sat down slowly, her back aching, hands resting on her belly, and for the first time, she looked at Jason not as a wife, not as a woman in love, but as someone who had been played. "You didn't have to pretend," she said, her eyes not leaving his. "I would have respected the truth more than this theater." Jason didn't answer. He rubbed the back of his neck and muttered something about stress, and how she always assumed the worst. The woman finally spoke then, introducing herself as Tamara with a tone that didn't seek permission. Eliza smiled politely. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. The air in the room was already thick enough. She only stood up, adjusted her bag, and said, "I'll be staying at the guest house by the junction. I won't disturb you." Jason opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. His silence was the only honest thing he had offered her in weeks. The guest house was modest, but it had a firm bed and clean curtains. Eliza sat on the edge of the mattress that evening, the walls buzzing with the hum of the generator outside. The ceiling fan turned lazily above her, its blades dusty and indifferent. She reached into her bag and brought out the ultrasound photo she kept inside her Bible. A little face, still forming, eyes closed, lips pursed. She stared at it, not because she needed to remind herself why she came, but because it grounded her. This child was growing inside her through storms and disappointments, feeding off her endurance. She hadn't told Jason it was a girl. She had planned to surprise him after the next scan. Now the surprise was hers. In the guest house room, she let the silence wrap itself around her. She didn't call Anita. She didn't cry. She only sat there, breathing slowly, hand on her belly, letting the baby's kicks reassure her that life continued, even when love didn't. Across town, Jason was probably explaining the visit to Tamara, painting her as hysterical or overly emotional, the way men do when they've been caught without an escape. But Eliza was past caring. She knew now that she had walked into a story already halfway written, and her name had been scratched out in pencil. She would stay one more night, then return to Abaddon the next day. Not because she'd been defeated, but because she no longer needed to beg for crumbs in a house she once helped build. Her dignity had tasted too much dirt already. The following morning brought with it a gray sky and the smell of dust, Kaduna's way of mourning without tears. Eliza checked out early, thanked the old woman at the reception who gave her an extra sachet of Milo for the road, and walked toward the bus park with a calmness she couldn't explain. The Kiki ride back was quieter this time. No twists. No turns. Just a long, straight road out of a lie. She leaned her head against the side rail, watching the city stretch and disappear behind her. Everything about that visit had confirmed what she already suspected, but hadn't wanted to accept. Jason was gone. Not dead, not vanished, but gone from the man she loved. His body remained, but his loyalty had evaporated like rain on hot tar. Still, she felt no hate, only a hollow acceptance. Love had carried her this far, but now it was courage she needed. She arrived at the bus station, found her seat, and let her hands rest on her belly. A woman beside her offered a sachet of water, noticing her discomfort. Eliza thanked her, and as the bus roared to life, she whispered softly to her unborn child, "We'll be okay." And for the first time in weeks, she believed it. Not because Jason would change, or because the pain would vanish overnight, but because she knew who she was again. A woman. A mother. A storm that survived itself. Eliza stood barefoot on the damp concrete, a sponge in one hand and a shallow bucket of foamy water by her feet. The sky in Abaddon was undecided, half of it scorched by the relentless sun, the other hinting at rain with scattered clouds that moved like lazy cattle. The black SUV sat like a judgment throne in the driveway, its surface covered in red dust from the last week's harmattan wind. Jason's instructions had been specific. "She's passing by this evening," he'd said, without meeting her eyes. "Make sure it's sparkling." He hadn't offered her help, not even a second thought. He had tossed her the car key like a mechanic, his face void of emotion, his voice more like an employer than a husband. She had said nothing. She simply changed into an old wrapper, tied her hair back with a faded scarf, and walked outside with her back curved like an old question mark. Each movement felt like betrayal to her body. Her belly pulled heavily downward, her lower back screamed in protest, and her palms trembled with every dip into the soapy water. Yet she washed, not because she was afraid, but because she had learned that even pain has its silence. Neighbors passed by with different reactions, some with pity, some with judgment, and others pretending not to see her at all. She caught sight of Mama Fawzat watching from behind her curtain, the lace fluttering slightly. The street was alive, but her part of it felt like a theater set, and she the tragic lead in a play no one paid to watch. Every time she paused to rest her back or catch her breath, Jason would glance at her from the veranda, where he leaned against the railing with a chilled bottle of malt and an unread newspaper. "The rims," he called out once. "She likes them clean." Eliza said nothing, but inside her chest, something broke and sank. The water in the bucket turned a dark red-brown shade, stained with soil, grime, and humiliation. The scent of car shampoo mixed with the sharp metallic taste of defeat as Eliza bent again, her fingers gripping the sponge until her knuckles stiffened. She could feel the baby shift within her, a gentle nudge like a protest from the womb. Still, she continued. The sun had no mercy. Sweat crawled from her forehead to her lips. The soap left a film on her arms that clung like guilt. By the time she reached the back of the vehicle, her knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the bumper to hold herself up. That was when it happened. Her vision tilted slightly, the sky swirling in slow motion, and for a second she saw black. Her hand flew to her side, where a sharp tug of pain pinched across her ribs. She gasped. Jason didn't move. He sat still, flipping a page in the newspaper like nothing had happened. Her breathing slowed again after a few seconds, the pain dulling into a steady throb. She steadied herself and continued. There was no pride left in this moment, but there was something else, something ancient and angry blooming in her chest. Not hatred. Not quite. It was too quiet for that. But it was something more permanent. Something that did not want revenge but would never forget. The bucket had only a little water left. As she dipped the sponge in again, her hand touched the rough edge and scratched slightly, and she'd barely noticed the sting. There were more pressing aches to listen to. She finished with the mirrors, rubbing them gently as if trying to erase not dirt, but memory. Her reflection stared back at her, swollen face, cracked lips, eyes that had forgotten how to blink freely. She didn't recognize the woman she saw. But she would soon. After the cleaning was done, she gathered her tools in silence and walked toward the backyard tap to rinse off. Her feet dragged slightly as she stepped through the patchy grass behind the house, passing the orange tree Jason once planted in their second year of marriage. It had never borne fruit. She opened the tap, rinsed the bucket, and wiped her face with the edge of her wrapper. There was no applause, no word of thanks. Jason didn't say a thing when she passed him on the way back inside. He was on the phone now, voice light, chuckling at something he wouldn't have shared with her even if she asked. She entered the bathroom and peeled off her wet clothes. Her body had patches of soap stuck between her thighs and behind her ears. She turned on the shower and let the cold water shock her back to reality. As it ran over her, she closed her eyes and leaned against the tiled wall. The silence in that bathroom was thick, the kind that collects in corners and refuses to leave. She touched her belly again and whispered something only the baby could hear. She didn't cry. She had done enough of that in the days before. What she felt now was something else. Like a seed being buried, not for death, but for growth. When she stepped out and dried herself, she moved like someone preparing for something. Not escape, not yet, but the beginning of the end. She dressed slowly, then walked into the bedroom, pulled out a small bag from the top shelf, and began to fold baby clothes into it, one after the other. Evening approached with a haze that dimmed the sky like a veil of smoke. Jason had gone out shortly after his call ended, and she didn't ask where. He didn't offer the information either. His car gleamed in the fading light, parked with pride as if it hadn't just swallowed her dignity. She sat at the dining table, sipping warm pap from a plastic cup and staring at the wall clock. Time moved differently now, no longer in hours but in decisions. The stillness of the house felt loud, like a scream waiting behind a locked door. She had packed enough for herself and the baby, just the essentials. The rest could rot, for all she cared. She reached for the small diary she kept beneath the cutlery drawer, opened it, and scribbled a short note. Not a letter. Not an explanation. Just a final echo of a woman whose voice had been ignored for too long. When Jason returned, he wouldn't find rage or drama. He would find absence. That would be her answer. She walked to the bedroom, lay on her left side like the doctor advised, and closed her eyes. The baby kicked once, softly, almost approvingly. Outside, the wind began to rise, knocking gently on the window panes, as if it too had something to say. The night unfolded like a tired curtain, slow and heavy, hanging over the walls of the house in a quiet that wasn't peaceful but suffocating. Eliza lay motionless on the narrow bed, her back curved inward from weeks of bad sleep, her legs slightly bent in a position that gave her the least pain. The room was dim, lit only by the street light outside that bled orange through the slits in the curtain. She had slept, or at least tried to, but her body would not fully surrender to rest. Her mind was alert, pacing in circles, going over every word she hadn't said and every ache she had swallowed. The baby stirred again, more frequent now, the kind of movement that no longer felt like fluttering but rolling, pressing against her sides like a plea for release. She shifted slightly, her hand on her belly, whispering gentle reassurances that were more for herself than the child. That's when she felt the sharp tug, sudden and deep, followed by a slow, warm rush between her thighs. She reached down instinctively, then pulled her hand back up, blinking at the moisture. Her heart skipped once, then twice. It wasn't sweat. It wasn't a dream. Her water had broken. For a full 10 seconds, she didn't move. She simply stared at the ceiling, her thoughts struggling to catch up with her body's decision. The silence that had once been her comfort now felt dangerous. Slowly, she pushed herself off the bed, grabbed the plastic mat near the door, and folded it over the soaked patch of the mattress. A low groan escaped her lips as the pressure in her lower back surged like a hot wave. She reached for the wall for support, then fumbled for her phone on the table, dialing Jason's number almost out of instinct. It rang once. Then again. No answer. A third time, still nothing. She stood there barefoot, one hand cradling her stomach, and realized something that stung more than the contraction itself. He wasn't coming. Eliza wasn't one to panic, but pain has a way of pushing dignity aside. She scrolled to the second number she had saved under emergency and tapped it with a trembling thumb. It was Mama Chinyere, the retired midwife who lived 3 houses away, always seen in her white wrapper and rubber slippers, always offering unsolicited prayers and ginger tea. The phone picked up on the second ring. "Hello," the older woman's voice croaked, confused from sleep. "It's time," Eliza whispered, gripping the table edge. "My water just broke." There was no pause, no extra questions, only shuffling sounds and the clatter of keys. "Stay where you are," Mama Chinyere replied. "I'm coming now." Eliza hung up and breathed through her nose, focusing on her balance as another wave of pain wrapped around her waist like a belt drawn too tight. Each second stretched like a rubber band about to snap. She moved toward the door, one step at a time, dragging her small packed bag behind her. By the time Mama Chinyere arrived in a neighbor's kiki, Eliza was already outside, seated on the small bench by the front step, her face wet with sweat and tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Did you call your husband?" the woman asked as she helped her into the vehicle. "3 times, Eliza whispered. "He didn't answer." Mama Chinyere looked at her, then said nothing. Some silences do not need explanation. The ride to the hospital felt longer than it should have. Every bump on the road was a strike against Eliza's spine. Her grip on the seat tightened with every contraction, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. When they finally arrived at the hospital's emergency entrance, the air smelled of antiseptic and urgency. Nurses wheeled her in, asked quick questions, scribbled on paper. One of them took her phone and promised to keep trying Jason's number. But deep down she already knew they wouldn't reach him, not tonight. Some absences are louder than screams. Labor has its own language. It is not polite. It does not wait for convenience or adjust to comfort. It arrives when it wants, how it wants, and it strips you down to your most vulnerable self. Eliza found herself in that room, legs elevated, sweat soaking through her hospital gown, the fluorescent light buzzing above her like a distant mosquito she couldn't swat away. The contractions came faster now, each one dragging a moan from her throat that sounded nothing like her. Her hair clung to her face, and her fingers clutched the side rails of the bed with a desperation she didn't know she had. Nurses moved around her, speaking in soft commands, placing instruments on trays. Someone dabbed her forehead with a cold cloth. Another placed a mask over her face. "You're doing well," one nurse said, though Eliza couldn't tell if it was true or just something they always said. Time lost meaning. It stretched, folded, and scattered. Then came the pushing, the unbearable pressure, the overwhelming need to bear down even as her body screamed in resistance. She thought of her mother then. She thought of the night her mother died giving birth to a child who never took his first breath. And she thought of herself, now caught in that same fragile place between life and death, hope and fear. She screamed once, a sound that rose from the bottom of her lungs and shook the walls. Then another push. Then silence. And then finally a cry, high, piercing, full of life. A nurse held up a small, squirming body, blood still slick on her skin. "It's a girl," someone said, as if Eliza didn't already know. Her eyes fluttered, her breath shallow, but she smiled. It wasn't big. It wasn't even full. But it was real. The nurse placed the baby on her chest, and Eliza wrapped her arms around the little bundle, whispering, "Hope." That was her name. Her beginning. Her reason. The room grew still after that, filled only with the hum of machines and the tiny murmurs of nurses cleaning up. Eliza lay on the bed, her body limp, her spirit both exhausted and somehow new. She stared at the ceiling, not blinking, her hand gently stroking the baby's soft curls. The nurse returned her phone. "Still no response," she said. Eliza nodded once, then placed the phone on the bedside table without checking. There was no more room for disappointment. She had brought a life into the world alone, and in doing so had reclaimed a piece of herself Jason had tried to erase. She fed the baby quietly, adjusting her gently until her tiny lips latched on. It hurt a little, but Eliza didn't flinch. She welcomed the pain. It was the only honest thing she had felt in weeks. Outside the window, the sky began to lighten, casting a faint blue glow through the slats of the curtain. The city was waking up, but Eliza had already done the hardest part of her day. When the doctor came in and congratulated her, she responded with a nod and a small smile. "You did well," he added, watching her closely. "Some women come in with partners who cause more harm than good. Maybe it's better this way." Eliza didn't respond. She didn't need anyone to tell her what she already understood. That strength was not loud. It didn't wear armor or carry swords. Sometimes, strength looked like a woman alone in a hospital bed, holding her child and choosing peace over bitterness. She would rest, then heal. And after that, she would leave. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with hope, wrapped in a shawl, sleeping soundly in her arms. The silence inside the house was different now. It didn't feel like the quiet of loneliness. It was something heavier, more deliberate, like the stillness of a graveyard after the mourners have gone. Jason stood in the doorway, the evening sun pouring in behind him like a judgmental spotlight. His shirt was half-tucked, face unshaven, the stench of stale alcohol and sweat clinging to him like debt. The gate had been ajar when he arrived. The bucket Eliza had used for washing the car, still lying on its side near the hibiscus bush, hardened soap scum crusted at the bottom. The car was dusty again, no longer gleaming. Flies circled lazily around the rim. A trail of ants moved in a slow, neat line near the driveway, as though even they had come to pay respects to something that used to be alive. He stepped inside, calling her name once. Then again. Only his own voice echoed back at him. The cushions on the couch were slightly out of place, one of her slippers still near the corridor. But she was gone. He checked the bedroom. The wardrobe door hung open, a few empty hangers swinging slightly, tapping the wooden frame. Her pink wrapper was missing. The drawer that used to hold her antenatal documents had been cleared out. Even her hairbrush was gone. He didn't panic. Not immediately. He simply sat down on the edge of the bed, palms over his face, trying to convince himself this was temporary. Maybe she went to her sister's. Maybe she just needed air. But the truth was a bitter wind. He had seen it in her eyes the last time they locked glances. Something had snapped. And now the silence wasn't just absence. It was consequence. 3 days passed before Jason finally found out where she was. Not from her. Not from her family. But through a nurse who used to be a neighbor's cousin. She had bumped into him at the supermarket, eyes narrowing the moment she saw his disheveled state. "Your wife gave birth," she said flatly, arms crossed. "You didn't know?" Jason had swallowed the question, the words bitter on his tongue. "When?" he asked. The nurse shrugged. "Last weekend. Baby girl. Strong lungs." Her voice held no warmth. She didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked away, muttering something he couldn't catch under her breath. Jason stood frozen for a moment before he moved, buying nothing, forgetting why he'd even gone to the supermarket in the first place. On his way home, he saw Tamara, on the back of another man's bike, head tilted in laughter, legs crossed confidently, as though Jason's name had never sat on her lips. She didn't see him. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. It didn't matter. He didn't call out to her. What could he have said? What version of himself would he have even introduced? He returned home that evening to a power cut and a cold plate of EBA he hadn't touched from the day before. The room smelled different now. Emptier. The walls didn't echo like they used to. There was no one to greet at the door, no voice humming in the kitchen, no warm water boiling on the stove. Only dust gathering on surfaces, and memories he had tried to bury now sitting boldly in every corner. He laid down that night on the very bed where Eliza's water had broken, and for the first time in years he couldn't sleep. Regret pressed down on his chest like a second body. He tried calling. Once, twice, then gave up after the fourth ring. No answer. He typed a message but deleted it before sending. He wasn't sure what to write. "I'm sorry" felt too thin, too used. "Come home" felt laughable. So he sat with the silence instead, playing old voice notes of her singing to the baby bump months before. Her voice was soft, high, affectionate. The kind of tone that held a person together, even if they were falling apart. He replayed them over and over until the battery died. The following morning, he got into his car and drove to Eloreen unannounced. Her sister's compound wasn't hard to find. He had been there once during their second year of marriage. He sat outside in the car for nearly 30 minutes before coming down. The gate was closed. He knocked twice. Then again. Anita opened, saw him, and immediately folded her arms. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice sharp. "I need to see her," he muttered. Anita didn't budge. "She doesn't want to see you." Jason's throat tightened. "Please. Just 5 minutes." She studied him, eyes narrowing. Then slowly she turned around. "Wait here." He waited. The air smelled of dust and fried stew. Somewhere in the distance, a generator buzzed. It took almost 10 minutes before Anita returned. "Alone?" She said no. She said more gently this time. Jason didn't argue. He just nodded. "Is the baby okay?" he asked. Anita didn't soften. "They're fine. And they don't need anything from you." He stood there, nodding again, the weight of those words falling around him like stones. When he turned back to the car, his steps were slower. The drive back felt longer. The roads were familiar, but everything else felt foreign. For the first time, Jason understood what it meant to be truly alone. He didn't go out much after that. The house felt heavier with each passing day. He began talking to himself, not loudly but in mutters, asking rhetorical questions, reliving conversations that never happened. The car he once forced her to wash sat outside untouched, its shine dulled by rain and dust. He couldn't bring himself to clean it. He left the sponge exactly where she'd dropped it, by the gate, like an artifact of his failure. Evenings became the worst. That was when he remembered most, how she'd wait for him with food that had gone cold, how she laughed with one hand over her belly, how she looked up from her book when he entered the room as if his presence still mattered. He would stare at the empty sofa where she used to sit, and wonder how long it took her to pack. Did she cry? Did she sit in the room and say goodbye in her mind? Or did she leave like a woman who had finally stopped waiting? One night, he walked into their bedroom, opened the wardrobe, and found one thing she hadn't taken, an old blue scarf he had bought her from the market. He picked it up and sat on the edge of the bed, holding it like a lifeline. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Rain began to fall, slow and steady. It tapped on the roof like fingers drumming on a table. The power was out again. He sat there in the dark, gripping the scarf, and whispered her name. Not loudly, just enough for the room to remember it. But no voice answered. Only the sound of water dripping from the edge of the leaking roof, and the creak of the window shutters shifting in the wind. Time passed without asking for permission. The weeks folded into each other like old bed sheets, and the once bright city of Abaddon dulled in Jason's eyes. The street no longer felt familiar. Even the laughter of children that used to echo from down the block began to sound like mockery. The house, his house, was no longer a home, just a shell with locks on its doors and dust in its corners. The neighbors had stopped greeting him. Even the chatty ones who once borrowed tomatoes or asked for change had learned to look away when he stepped outside. His phone barely rang, and when it did, it was never the call he wanted. One morning, he gathered the courage to call Anita again, hoping her tone might have softened. But the phone rang twice and then ended, his number likely blocked. He didn't try again. Regret had carved its initials on his chest, deep and permanent. He walked around the house as if stepping through a museum of mistakes, each room carrying the scent of what had been lost. In the hallway, the faint mark of Eliza's height chart remained on the wall, where she'd been tracking her growth during pregnancy, each line made with a pen and quiet excitement. He hadn't noticed it before. Now it stared at him like a scar he didn't earn. He spent more time in silence, no longer playing music or watching the television. The sound of static was somehow more appropriate. Sometimes he would sit by the gate and stare down the street, as if expecting someone to appear, someone who no longer needed him, someone who had found peace far from where he stood. In Succa, where Eliza had relocated quietly, the air smelled of fresh yam and wet leaves. The home she now shared with her aunt was small but complete, painted in faded blue, with a veranda wide enough to sit on during calm evenings. Hope had begun to coo more, her small hands grasping at air, eyes alert and curious. Eliza moved with new rhythm now, not rushed, not heavy, just steady. Her body had healed slowly, but her mind took longer. She still had nights where sleep came late, where she woke up expecting a voice she hadn't heard in weeks. But there were no sharp edges anymore, only rounded truths. In the mornings, she would carry Hope outside wrapped in a warm shawl, and sit by the pawpaw tree while the wind stroked her face like an apology. Her aunt, a quiet woman who rarely spoke unless necessary, cooked yam porridge most evenings and never once asked her about Jason. That silence became a balm, a kind of permission to forget without explanation. Eliza had begun tutoring again. Children from nearby compounds came to her with notebooks and missing pencils, their voices full of questions and laughter. It wasn't the life she once dreamed of, but it was hers. Owned. Built with hands that had scrubbed away humiliation and planted something better. She hadn't changed her number. Jason could still call, but she didn't wait for it. Hope was now her beginning, her second chance folded inside the curls of a girl who looked nothing like her father and everything like the version of Eliza that survived. One afternoon, Eliza went to the market to buy palm oil. She tied Hope snugly on her back, her wrapper firm across her chest, shoulders straight. As she moved through the narrow aisles between tomato stalls and dry fish sellers, An old woman sitting beneath a parasol looked up at her with a slow smile. "You carry peace with you," the woman said without prompt. Eliza turned, surprised. "Sorry?" The woman smiled again, tapping the dust from her feet. "You've been through fire," she said in Igbo. "But your cloth didn't burn." Eliza nodded once, her eyes softening. It wasn't the first time someone had said something similar in recent days. It felt like the universe had finally chosen her for comfort. When she returned home, Hope had fallen asleep against her back, her lips slightly parted, fingers curled like tiny seeds. Eliza unwrapped her slowly and placed her in the cot by the window. A breeze moved through the room, carrying the scent of mango and soil. She sat beside her daughter and watched her breathe. In her heart, there was no room left for hate. What Jason did could not be undone, and she had stopped trying to carry it. She had survived the disrespect, the abandonment, the humiliation, and the silence. She had emerged with a daughter who reminded her that some beginnings are hidden in endings. She still remembered the day she knelt to wash that car, how the water stung her hands and shame clung to her skin like smoke. But even then, something had awakened inside her. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. The kind that doesn't speak, but walks away without looking back. Far from Nsukka, in a cluttered room in Ibadan, Jason sat hunched over an old notebook. The light bulb above him flickered occasionally, casting uneven shadows across his face. He had begun writing letters to Eliza, none of which he sent. There were 6 so far, all hidden in a drawer beneath an empty tin of baby formula he had bought in the early days of her pregnancy, back when he still believed he was a good man. The letters varied in tone. Some were full of apology. Others were just questions. One of them was just a list of things he missed. Her humming, the way she stirred pap without spilling, the way she laughed at his weak jokes. He read them aloud sometimes, his voice cracking in the middle of sentences. He imagined her opening one, reading it under soft light, maybe even crying. But he never posted them. Deep down, he knew that healing doesn't always come with return tickets. Not all stories end with reunion. Some just leave footprints behind, and those have to be enough. He hadn't seen Tamara again. She had left without a word, and he no longer cared to chase illusions. His mother had visited once and sat with him on the veranda, watching the overgrown grass sway. "You thought she would stay no matter what," she had said. "You didn't think she would choose herself." He hadn't responded. He just stared at the gate, remembering the last time it opened for Eliza, the slow way she stepped out, never in a rush, as though she knew her absence would speak louder than her voice ever could. And now, as rain began to fall again, tapping on the roof like an old song, Jason closed his notebook and whispered her name, not to summon her back, but to finally let it go. Sometimes silence teaches us what shouting never could. In life, we may find ourselves in rooms we no longer recognize, serving love that no longer serves us. But remember this, you are not weak for walking away from where you were never watered. You are strong for choosing peace over performance, for choosing healing over staying hurt. Your value is not measured by how much pain you can carry, but by how boldly you protect your joy. May your heart never kneel before anyone who cannot cherish it. May your days be free from the weight of false love and hidden betrayals. May your home be filled with peace, your mind with clarity, and your hands with blessings that multiply. May you walk into rooms that recognize your worth, and may your name be spoken in places where honor lives. Whatever tried to break, you will become the reason you rise higher. May strength find you in your sleep, and joy wake you up each morning. And if you've ever cried in silence, may laughter return to your lips louder than ever before. In healing, in peace, in full restoration, we say together, Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.